Hello and welcome to the Denver Homes Market Report. This is Ricky.schoonover of Mode Denver Real Estate. I hope you're enjoying these last few little snow flurries in late April. My goodness, enough already. For one, I'm ready for some nice 65 to 75 degree days. I'm tired of the 65 degrees one day and 30 degrees or less the next. This 50-year-old body just can't handle it. My hands are cold, my feet are cold, and I just can't seem to get my core up to a comfortable temperature. Well, I guess that's Colorado for you. We'll survive. Just try to keep warm the best you can. We have some nicer weather on the way. So last week was a fun episode. If you missed it, I encourage you to check it out. We went over the age-old question, what exactly are the differences between a real estate professional and a realtor? There's so much confusion out there with public perception, thinking that they are the same person, and they are not. In a nutshell, a real estate professional is a person who is qualified through the state on the bare minimums of what the state requires in order to help clients buy and or sell real estate. A realtor is a person who has committed themselves to the Realtor Code of Ethics, a person who has stepped up their game both personally and professionally, someone who is committed to keeping themselves on the cutting edge when it comes to education and pushing the real estate industry to be a system in which everyone benefits from fair and honest dealings, which then foster trust, stability, and transparency. So, if you still don't know the difference between someone who meets the bare minimum requirements to practice real estate and the one who pushes themselves and their industry to maximize public trust, then go back and listen to last week's podcast. I hope that becomes crystal clear. I know it can be confusing, but really, all you need to do is ask the question, are you a realtor? If that answer is not an outstanding and proud, yes, of course, then you may want to keep looking for someone to represent you in the sale or purchase of your next home. So, I'd love to bring my world to you through our weekly podcast. I love when an issue pops up in my day-to-day operations where I have real-life clients who I'm working with and they have questions about the current market trends. Well, I seem to have these various conversations come up almost every week. And this one's a good one. In fact, I'm still kind of formulating in my head as I'm taking my notes for this week's podcast, just how I'm going to present this information to you. What do you know about love letters? These are letters where a potential buyer not only submits their offer to the seller, but they also want the seller to know some personal information about you as the buyer. Perhaps try to find that commonality or some shared interests, or perhaps reassuring the seller that their home, which they built, will not be destroyed, or that the buyer appreciates all the work they had done into the home. Maybe they both have the same breed of dog or have a child of the same age. Or perhaps the sellers are moving because they already have one child and they're planning another. And while these buyers are childless now, they are planning to have one. And that nursery in the guest room would be perfect. Whatever the case may be, the love letter is a way to the seller's heart in trying to win the bid in this crazy competitive housing market. Sounds great, right? You put in your offer and you're on the bottom of the pile of a dozen other offers. Maybe this love letter connects to the seller and gives you a leg up on that other competition. Well, on the surface, that may seem like a great idea. However, we have this thing in real estate. We call it an arm's length transaction. If you have ever bought a house, then you have noticed how much effort us realtors or real estate professionals take to make sure your direct communication with the other party is kept to a minimum, if at all. It's not because we're mean or that we don't like the other party. it comes down to a very delicate balancing act to keep emotions in check for the benefit of all parties involved. Buying a home is one of the largest business transactions we can make in life. Some of us have bought and sold many homes. Others, they may be buying their very first home. Now, some will go on to buy and sell more homes, while others, this one home is the home they plan to spend the rest of their days in. Everyone is different, and there is not a right or wrong way to invest in the home. So, you may have asked your realtor to help you write a love letter, and you were surprised that they advised you to not do that. I mean, why? Well, let me attempt to explain. Let's say you really love this house, and you want the seller to know how much you appreciate all their hard work in making this home look perfect. In the course of this letter, you mention something personal. Maybe it's, close to your church and that you're looking forward to walking to this church each week. Before the seller read your letter, your realtor and the listing broker were having great negotiations, great interactions. And even though you were 10th in line on the offers, you felt you were making ground and that your offer was being strongly considered. And you were thinking this love letter was going to push you over the top. So you write your heartfelt letter, your broker begrudgingly sends it over the next morning, and then you open your emails and you check the listings, and lo and behold, that house is now under contract. You panic. You call your realtor. How could it be under contract? Is it with us? Did we win? Why didn't we know the home was under contract? So your broker calls the listing broker, and sadly, right after you submitted that love letter, the seller selected a different offer. All of a sudden, that shock becomes anger. You are convinced the seller must have read your letter and saw that you belong to that particular church, and they must not agree with the people who attend with that church. These are powerful emotions. That is your faith, the one place of solitude that you always turn to in the face of life's challenges. You get angry and upset, and without ever really knowing why the seller took that other offer. So you make it up in your mind that it must have been the fact that they do not agree with your beloved church. You stew over this for days. You read and reread your letter over and over. The more times you read the letter, the stronger your convictions become in your head that this was it. The seller decided not to take your offer on the sole reason that you belong to this particular church. You want answers. You want revenge. And in your mind, you convince yourself this kept you from winning the bid of your dream home. As you listen to me right now, this sounds crazy, but it happens. In fact, I even had clients recently who, they weren't crazy like this, but, we did lose a bid on a house, and they couldn't help but think maybe perhaps, two ladies with the same last name might have swayed a seller not to accept their offer. Now, they were not angry or upset to the point of demanding a reason, but it did put them in a little bit of a slump for that day. And as we are out there looking at more homes, that situation did weigh on their thoughts. And it was a little bit harder to get excited about the homes that day. And I finally asked, what's going on? And they told me, in the back of their minds, they were just curious, if the fact that there were two ladies with the same last name, if that had any influence in them not winning that contract. Maybe these sellers had something against gay people, or more specifically, lesbians. I first let them know I would sure hope not. I went on to explain to them, in my 18 years of real estate, public perceptions and bias against same-sex couples has greatly improved. I also pointed out to them how many brothers, sisters, mother-in-laws, father-son, mother-daughter. Real estate is terribly expensive. It is not uncommon at all for family members to team up and buy homes together. So, just because they had the same last name the seller had no idea if they were sisters, mother-daughter, or a couple. But in their minds, they had built up this perception that they did not win. And maybe, just maybe, because the seller didn't want to sell to a lesbian couple. After my chat, and me, sharing with them the countless transactions I have been involved with any combination of family members, they finally kind of shrugged it off and said, well, maybe it didn't have anything to do with us being a couple. So, just to drive this point home, there is a reason that direct communications between a buyer and seller are kept at arm's length. The reason why realtors and yes, real estate professionals have been able to be that middle buffer, and why most homes that are sold are not sold with extensive direct communications between the buyer and the seller. When things go great and you become friends, that's great. However, most real estate deals are emotional transactions, and the last thing you need is for a misconception or a misperception to get in the way of you being able to buy or sell your home. This is when lawsuits get filed, when one party in the transaction feels they were wrongly judged or discriminated against, if that perception is even misguided. So leave the love letters to lovers. And when you're buying or selling your home, sure, you want to know enough about the home to make a buying decision, and you want to know enough about your potential buyers that they are committed to the purchase and qualified to buy the home on the terms they've agreed upon. If after the transaction you decide to become friends, outside of the real estate deal, that's fine. But from the very beginning all the way to the closing table, and I would argue even beyond, I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to make sure the details of the transaction and the terms of the contract are followed with as little interaction between the two parties as possible. In the end, this will save you from a lawsuit. Well, I hope I explained well enough for you today why real estate benefits from having a broker who is representing the seller and has a fiduciary duty to look after the seller's best interests, and why it's equally as important for the buyers to also have their own representation. And most of all, the reason this has become the norm in our industry is so we can keep real estate transactions at arm's length. I have one other idea here. Think of it this way. In the workplace, it's generally not a good idea to date other coworkers, especially when it's a boss and a subordinate. When things are great, they're great. But when things go south, the entire operation can suffer. The same goes for real estate. When the transaction is going great and everybody are friends, that's great. But even if a perception that the relationship or personal knowledge was the cause of something not going right, that is when the whole transaction can be at risk. So, if you're a seller, hire a realtor you trust to represent you. And if you're a buyer, again, choose a realtor to look after your best interests and keep that transaction at arm's length. Friendly, honest, and follow the contract at all times. If you're thinking of buying or selling your home, please give me a call. This is, once again, Ricky Schoonover of Mode Denver Real Estate. 720-688-5110. Feel free to also check out my website, denverhomesmarket.com. And of course, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tune in each week to my podcast, the Denver Homes Market Report. I hope you will join me next Thursday.